Welcome, friends,
to the How-To Heretic.
I'm Uncle Mark.
And I'm Uncle Dan.
And I'm Uncle Doug.
And this is your user's guide to life on the outside.
Yes, sir. Leaving religion is the first step into a larger, better world.
But it can also be a scary world. Things work differently now.
Never fear. That's why we're here.
We're your audio uncles. And with help from good friends and experts in all sorts of fields,
we're going to share the stories and seek the knowledge to build a great life.
After all, you only get the one that we know of, so you better make the most of it.
Gentlemen.
Hello.
Hey-yo.
Hello. How are you? Hope all is well.
Just so good.
Good. I am reaching out to you from my isolation, my solitary in a tower in Toronto, and it's wonderful. But
yeah, that's right. Look at this. I can actually leave the room that I'm in. Unlike you, Uncle.
I cannot under federal mandates, but
right.
Soon enough. Anyway, what a show! Despite us being divided by a border, we are not divided by anything else. I don't know what that means, but today I am going to talk about some very scary geometry.
Yeah, you are. I, however, am going to talk about a cool guy in a really, really stupid book.
Yeah, the accidental hero of a book.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I am going to take on the anti-vax movement.
Yikes.
Yay, they exist. So, quick note, we realized that we all had so much great information this week. We're running really long. So, to any patrons who jumped in this past week, and I know we have Heaven, and I know we have a saint or two, we want to beg your indulgence to push that off till next week, and we will give you all the love then. But we just want to keep the show under 12 hours today. So,
yeah.
If everybody's cool with that, let's do it.
Well, Uncle Dan.
Well, hello.
When I was younger and I was in elementary school, I think maybe junior high school, I read the quote by Lincoln about the better angles of our character, and I never heard it spoken out loud. So for several years, I was left trying to figure out what exactly that meant.
Well, you got the one under your arm, and then the elbow one.
Well,
and,
I just assume that whatever angle you have, you want to make sure it's a right one.
Yeah, he was very into 90 degrees for some reason.
Yeah.
So, but I think Uncle Mark has some something to talk about, the not so great angles of our nature.
These are not the great angles. These are not the better angles of our nature, let me tell you. So, we try to have some fun on the show, guys. We try to laugh at the absurd and silly every chance we get, and that's great. But sometimes when you set out to make a podcast about the comedic side of cults and craziness, the cults and craziness outweighs the comedy just a little bit. And while there is some funny stuff about today's very peculiar subject, there is some very, very not funny stuff about it as well. So let's laugh and then let's not for a while. Content warning, there are references to sexual violence and sexual violence against children in this segment.
So help me. If this is another anthill thing, I am leaving the podcast.
It feels like it's going to go that way, but it doesn't go all the way there. So,
okay.
Yeah. So it's not graphic descriptions like it was with the Anthill Kids. It's just the mention of it. So, but it's kind of impossible to tell the story without it. So be warned. So we've talked before on the show about the satanic panic. Yeah. That not really over nationwide hysteria of the 1980s and 90s that drove this idiot country. Well, that one, I'm not there at the moment. I'm in Canada. Out of its uptight mind and saw masses of false accusations, arrests, imprisonments, and other assorted bullshit. For a primer on it, please refer back to episode 23. Well, the sort of Satanists that actually rape, kidnap, and murder people at random that were the shadowy villains for this decades-long cultural nightmare didn't really exist. Put a pin in that for just a minute. The Satanists that were around were mostly adherents and imitators of the Church of Satan, the brainchild of the hard-to-take seriously Anton LaVey. The Church of Satan was really and still is just another expression of 60s counterculture and rejection of the stuffy, conservative, stifling American culture that preceded it. The Church of Satan is mostly a hedonistic movement of pure individuality, inspired by, among others, the works of Ayn Rand. You can listen to Doug's segment on her. What a wonderful person she was in episode 90. And while many accuse them of being kind of sexist and pricks online, they aren't kidnapping anyone's babies for human sacrifices in the forest. That's not who they are.
Right.
And more recently, of course, most people will be familiar with the Satanic Temple, featured in last year's wonderful documentary, Hail Satan, and co-founded by Lucian Greaves, whom we spoke to in episode 16. Lucian and the Satanic Temple are the farthest thing from the murderous cannibals haunting the long, dark American night of the 1980s. They are, in fact, merry pranksters and First Amendment heroes, rather haunting Southern and square state legislatures with their truck-mounted Baphomet statue, trying to fend off the worst excesses of creeping Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Child-murdering bad guys, they are certainly not.
That we know about.
That we know. Lucian, you've been served. You're on blast.
Keep it tight, Lucian.
They've used our outrageous religious presumptions in this country as an act of judo against those who ceaselessly abuse it. So well played, the Satanic Temple. Well, remember when I said those B-movie satanic warlocks who kill and rape at random didn't exist? Well, it turns out they kind of do. And just to gild the devil's lily, they are also ardent, madly violent Nazis. Isn't that fun, guys? Oh, nice.
Well, you had me at ardent, madly violent Nazis.
So today we pay a visit to the satanics that should cause some panics, the Order of Nine Angles, or the O9A if you're nasty. The Order of Nine Angles is a pretty weird little outfit for a variety of reasons. The semi-mysterious people that have authored its literature and occasionally spoken for it have purposefully surrounded it in loads of mystery and autobiographical legend. Alleged to have been founded in the late 60s by an unnamed woman in the west of England when she brought together 3 separate satanic temples and covens. In the early 70s, a man who called himself Anton Long joined, and in short order had risen through its ranks, those being neophyte, initiate, external adept, internal adept, master, grandmaster, and immortal, to become its master. Long handwrote thousands of pages laying out the philosophy and magical, with a K, practices, defining the order as a highly secretive, left-hand path practice to reach the gods of the acausal realm. It's amorphous, anarchistic, and totally decentralized. They follow what's called the pathai-mathos, the path of suffering, to come to know themselves, to become masters of the causal realm, and eventually masters of the acausal realm as well. I shall explain below. It wasn't really until the 1980s that the O9A really even made itself known by publishing articles in already existing occultist and far-right nationalist magazines. It also began distributing its founding scriptures, most notably the Black Book of Satan and its own magazine, Fenrir, named for the fearsome wolf of Norse mythology. Much of the literature was written by Anton Long and an artist and musician who went by Christos Beast, but has been identified as Richard Molt. I should also note that most scholars and journalists who've studied O9A, far more than I have, identify Anton Long as a very fascinating and peculiar man whose real name is David Myatt. Some disagree, including Myatt himself, who vehemently denies any association with the O9A, going so far as to challenge a journalist who said he was to a duel with a Nazi dagger.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like someone from the O9A would.
I mean, that's just
exactly.
He protesteth too little. But the preponderance of evidence seems to support it is, in fact, Myatt. But we'll call him Anton Long for the most part in here. Unlike the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple, the Order of Nine Angles very much believe in the theistic evil god Satan, and with him a pantheon of so-called dark gods, including a sinisterly female version of Baphomet, who in their version looks very much like the Hindu god of destruction, Kali, who will bring about a violent revolution that allows for a new system of racially superior tribal warlord governments called the Imperium, and that golden age of hellish violence and total destruction of the former Magian Nazarene, as they call it, basically their term for Judeo-Christian, of the Magian Nazarene order that has enfeebled and poisoned the natural violence of the human spirit, preventing our ascendancy to Ubermensch, and then in this Mad Max version of the future, will set out to conquer and colonize the galaxy, led by the Dark Lord, the Dark God Vindex, into a neo-pagan, Hitlerian, interstellar satanic eternity. You had me at Vindex. Where do I sign? Huh?
Right.
That was quite a sentence.
That's a lot.
That, I was trying to distill it down to the essence, and I think I got there. So
I think so. I didn't understand any of what you said, but I think you nailed it.
So the O9A believes there have been 5 aeons of man, each one lasting around 2,000 years. The primal, the Hyperborean. For some more wholesome Nazi content, check out our segment on Hyperborea in episode 148. The Sumerian, the Hellenistic, and the current one, the Western. Each aeon ends in a few hundred years of increased authoritarianism and militarism, and this aeon's period of dictatorship, they predict, will begin sometime between 1990 and 2011 and will last until 2390. So any minute 10 years ago now.
Right.
At that point, we'll commence.
I mean, up until this year, it seems like they kind of had a guy.
Here. He figures very, very prominently with a lot of these neo-Nazi satanic people.
Yeah.
Like Trump really, they saw as the guy, which should come as no surprise. So at that point, we'll commence the 6th great age, the Aeon of Fire. Their own new satanic timescale begins in the year 1889, the birth year of a middling watercolorist turned eager European real estate tycoon Adolf Hitler. They have praised Hitler's Reich as, quote, a practical expression of satanic spirit, a burst of Luciferian light, of zest and power in an otherwise Nazarene, pacified, and boring world.
Boy, I never thought I would hear the word zesty applied to the Third Reich.
Yeah, it's kind of citrusy.
Also, Nazarene being used as like pussified or whatever is an interesting phrasing.
Yeah, the Magian Nazarene, it just weakened us. It made us all feeble. And yet, weirdly, for Jew-hating, hyper-violent racists, they are adamant in their Holocaust denial, saying it was a myth constructed by the Magian Nazarene world order to denigrate the Nazis and therefore discredit them. It's so weird to me how some of the most rabid neo-Nazis who foment for another Holocaust feel the need to deny the actual one.
Yeah, I know. It's so crazy.
So people in occult circles used to joke about the order of the nine angles of nine angles as the order of no members, which is funny and true because they maybe had a dozen members for a decade or more. Some people think as few as 5, but this gets to part of what is so different about them. They weren't really looking for any, not in the normal cult sense. They flew almost entirely under the radar. Other than Myatt / Anton Long, they really have no leader. Pretty much all their literature is available for free. They don't want money. They don't want to meet you, etc. They may be the most uncult-like cult I've ever studied.
Huh.
So remember when we had my friend, former undercover FBI agent Greg Rogers on the show in episode 154, when Dan talked to him about Operation Underground Railroad and all the bullshit around human trafficking myths. We remember our secret agent man. Well, in his career at the Bureau, one of his beats was taking down American neo-Nazis, and he took down a lot of them. And I asked him how he could keep doing it again and again, and they never got wise to it. He said it was because A, they were fucking stupid, and B, they were so preoccupied with taking power over whatever small group they were in, so bitterly hateful of all the other groups, and so consumed with infighting, they never thought to make a website where they could post all the pictures of the feds that were taking them down.
Right.
Right. I couldn't believe they weren't comparing notes. And he said they hate each other.
Yeah.
The order of nine angles seems totally immune to any of that. There's no leadership to usurp. There's no money to embezzle. There's no power to be had by taking control. Cult
In other words,
experts.
they're just boring.
Well, they're not boring, that's for sure. Cult expert Steve Hassan says the motivation behind cults is always some combination of money, sex, and power, right? But none of that really exists here. It's really kind of a free, open source, radical ideology concocted by true believers and just left out on the dusky edge of society's view for anyone to find.
Fucking hippies.
According to O9A's own FAQ page on their ancient WordPress website, I did promise a little bit of comedy here. When one finds their literature, one should do what they want with it. If they want to become a member, they don't even really have membership. So if they want to become associated, great. That's what they call them. People who are connected to them are just associates. Right. It's like gig Satanism. But you're free to interpret it your own way, or even start your own temple known as a Nexion, or not. It's up to you, right? And when you do that, there's no fees. You don't have to buy anything. It's very strange. So should you decide to actually live by the group's what they call sevenfold way, who initiates you? Well, you do, dummy. And it's rather fucking intense. One of the easiest initiation rituals is finding a secluded wild spot and laying there for an entire night without sleeping or even moving. Okay, most people could probably do that. Another is to live in the wilderness with zero contact with anyone else for 6 months. The ritual of the
we've all seen the show Alone.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen for most people.
Right. The ritual of the abyss has one living totally alone again, this time in the depths of a cave for a month.
Where are you finding these caves?
I don't. They're hereabout. Another is to walk alone over rough terrain, covering 300 miles in just 15 days, which is 20 miles a day, which is
That's doable.
Pretty substantial for 2 weeks.
At the end of all this, do you get your Nazi merit badge?
Well, here's the other thing that's really fascinating about it is nobody checks up on this. They have this dedication to this radical self-honesty, right? And if you didn't do it, you failed, and that's enough, right? It's really fascinating. So this is some next level commitment. And all you have to do to become a Mormon is have the bad luck of turning 8 in casserole country, right?
Right.
So it gets even more intense. Once you've passed those hermetic mind-breaking tests, you're ready for what they call an insight roll. That means doing something so outside any experience you've ever had, or joining a group you never would have considered for at least 6 and up to 18 months. It could be joining the police or the military, traveling around the world on foot without $1 and begging and stealing to do it, joining ISIS, seriously, normal gap year kind of things.
Yeah, this sounds a lot like Batman Begins. I feel like
a little bit.
It kind of does.
It's like this evil kind of samurai coda, right? It's highly disciplined.
Also, it's starting to make a lot of sense that they had no members. That part's starting to make way more sense to me.
Very few people can pass through these crucibles, right?
Or would want to,
but some do. So getting comfortable with violence and weapons training, etc., is pretty normal neo-Nazi fare. But specifically for the Order of Nine Angles, it serves a purpose called culling. Specifically culling of Opfers, which is the German word for victims.
Oh.
Part of the rite of passage and self-development for someone following the O9A path is ritually ridding the species of unworthy garbage. This is literally part of their doctrine, as laid out in several publications, including A Guide to Human Sacrifice.
Oh, my God.
Culling, A Guide to Sacrifice Part 2, and Victims, A Sinister Expose, and Guidelines for Testing of Opfers. You see, these guys aren't just nihilists. Say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism, dude. At least it's an ethos.
Right.
And an Opfer must, quote, self-select.
What?
They don't know that they're being tested, but they are being watched. And when an Opfer is culled, not only is the species less filthy, but in many cannibal cultures, the murderer inherits the life force of the victim. bringing them closer to being the idyllic Übermensch, the Nietzschean Übermensch.
No, this is not okay. Nothing that's happening is okay.
No, and it doesn't get better. and more than a few targeted uppers have indeed been culled, meaning fucking murdered by Order of Nine Angles initiates. More on that in a tick. In preparation for this segment, I read many articles, and one very interesting one just on neo-fascists generally in the online journal Bellingcat.com by Robert Evans. He has an excellent quote here that could apply to so many of the segments we do about this stuff. I should note that one of the more frustrating elements about covering the fascist right is that much of what they say sounds ridiculous and makes them appear less than serious. This is why it is important to remember that these groups have a body count and represent a real threat. Their absurdity does not negate their danger. And there is some silly shit about the Order of Nine Angles, like the fact they can't or won't get their story straight about how they got their name, or that one of their most important rituals is a board game called the Game of Stars. They think of it as something like the Lament Cube from Hellraiser, like a puzzle that opens up the membrane between the causal world and the acausal world, where the dark gods live. But you'll laugh if you see it because it's exactly Spock's multi-level chessboard from the old Star Trek series, right? Haha, silly, but these people are deadly fucking serious.
Right.
The goal of O9A is chaos, pandemonium, rape, murder, criminality, and the total implosion of the Magian Nazarene order to bring about the Aeon of Fire. To quote from an official O9A publication, 2 acts of assault are most commonly recommended: lynching and sexual assault.
Jesus.
They ardently encourage rape as terrorism. They are also 100% pro-violent pedophilia. Again, as a vehicle not only for terror and chaos, but an assertion of the superior will of an O9A associate to dominate the weak and the useless.
My God.
Oh, yeah.
Weak and the useless meaning children.
Children, of course.
They are weak and often useless. So
in another publication, it says children must never be culled. So they have, guys, they have ethics. They don't kill children.
Well, that's good to know.
They just believe they can be raped at will.
Right. Well, they are pretty weak, so obviously.
The founder of the main U.S. Order of Nine Angles, Nexion, called the Temple of Blood, of is OV, is a guy named Joshua Caleb Sutter, who is a real peach. In addition to fashioning himself as a hyper-pro North Korean propagandist, among a few other daffy things, he was actually contacted apparently by North Korean intelligence, and they were working with him. And at some point, they decided he's just too fucked in the head. Like the North Koreans are like, nope, can't do business with this guy.
Yeah.
Among a few other daffy things, he wrote a bit of A90 Nazi fanfic called Iron Gates. It's horrific both in vision and grammar. Suffice it to say, it paints a sloppy but nightmarish John McNaughton-style portrait of the future the Order of Nine Angles wishes to foment. Mass murder of the Untermensch and endless days of child rape and torture in service of the triumph of mediocre white men. This hellacious future has become an inspiration to the violent American neo-fascist paramilitary, the Atomwaffen Division, whose rallying cry is Iron Gates now. Right? So that's the future they want.
Okay.
Horrific? Of course. Stupid? Without question. But it has ignited the passions of more than a few hyper-violent, dumb motherfuckers everywhere. Here in America, we have a lot of violent neo-Nazi movements. Most, like my friend Greg said, are fucking idiots who are more likely to blow their own brains out by mistake than they are to hurt anyone else, but some are not. Here's some of the crimes. Anton Long's A90 text inspired David Copeland to place several nail bombs around areas in London frequented by gay and immigrant communities in 1999. His nail bombs killed 3 people and injured 140 others.
Wow.
The British anti-fascist group Hope Not Hate records at least 6 O9A associates being prosecuted for terrorism in 2020 alone. Here in Toronto, an associate of the order, quote, culled 2 South Asian men who had nothing to do with anything by stabbing them in the throats. In the States, Order devotee Jared William Smith, an Army specialist, was charged with leaking classified material on high explosives and weapons of mass destruction in order to kill federal agents for, quote, the glory of his satanic religion. Another U.S. soldier, Ethan Melzer, stationed at a U.S. base in Italy, passed on information to help O9A members and an affiliated group called the Rapewaffen Division, who are exactly as they sound,
God.
To ambush and kill as many of his fellow soldiers as possible. Luckily, the plot was stopped. He's facing life in prison. His arrest exposed other Order associates within the military, including one stationed in Kuwait, and one in the National Guard who intended to use his presence at the George Floyd protest this last summer to start a satanic racial holy war. By a crazy piece of luck, he was apprehended before he could start shooting. He was also a member of the O9A affiliated Rapewaffen Division that I mentioned, a terror group hellbent on using rape as a weapon. There are several more known cases of murder and attempted murder and terrorism connected to the Order of Nine Angles and groups they have major influence over, like the Atomwaffen Division, National Action, the Sonnenkrieg Division, and the Nordic Resistance Movement. Now, as the Order is declaredly not only pro-human sacrifice, pro-rape, and pro-sexual violence directed at children, you may have correctly surmised that when one of the O9A is run to ground by the authorities, they are very likely to be in possession of a lot of images of child pornography and child rape. No need to dwell any further on that, but it seems to be standard equipment for apprehended O9A associates, including a teenager who is the youngest person ever charged with terrorism in the UK. I think he was 15.
Wow.
So what of their semi-leadership? Richard Molt, a.k.a. Christos Beast, went underground for several years and seems to have denounced the group. He was living as a Catholic in a rural part of England, and it wasn't until he resurfaced as a fairly prominent folk musician that his past was rediscovered by his bandmates, who kicked him to the curb. Although having sworn off his past, he seems once again to be active in the Order. And what about David Myatt, a.k.a. Anton Long, very likely the actual originator of the Order? As I mentioned at the top, he's a fascinating figure. In addition to kicking the lid off this nightmare, he's a classical Greek scholar, has lived all over the world, lived for a time as both a Christian and a Buddhist monk, and in the 2000s converted to Islam, moved to the Middle East, and in fluent Arabic became the West's most ardent spokesperson for and advocate of Osama bin Laden and called for total jihad against the decadent Magian Nazarene Order of the West. He's lived a hell of a life, guys.
I was going to say that sounds like three completely misspent evil lifetimes. But
he's a horrible human being, but he's also incredibly fascinating and not an idiot. He spent 10 years doing this before renouncing Islam and moving home to rural England as well, where he apparently still lives and perhaps still quietly guides the Order of Nine Angles from his keyboard. Many people think his time in Islam was just another of his many insight roles, infiltrating a group in order to raise one's awareness and possibly destroy it from within. This may also have been the motivation for Richard Molt's renunciation of the Order, his conversion to Catholicism, and his time in the folk scene. But in either case, these men seem to be still at large, now in their later years, and despite having unleashed a methodology for very disturbed and disordered minds everywhere to become the worst versions of themselves, they seem unmolested by the police, which is baffling to me.
Well, except that what four members there are all in the police now.
Well, that's the thing, is they think that there's different levels of association with the Order, and you kind of choose, and they have names. There's artists who can be associated with it. There's street gangs. There's individual black magicians that can have different associations with it. And there's a lot of worry about how infiltrated they are into the military and police forces in the United States, Canada, and Germany, at least. So they're the best guesstimates that these anti-fascist groups make is there might be 2,000 of them in the world. But that seems like a couple thousand too many.
Yeah, most definitely.
So it's a really fascinating, horrible, evil, truly, truly evil, but very fascinating group of people, right? And
I've never heard of them. Never
Yeah.
at all.
American law enforcement has only recently become even aware of them.
Wow.
They have managed to keep themselves in the shadows so successfully, and what one of the journalists I read was talking about is they don't. If you come across an Order of Nine Angles member, he's not going to tell you who he is. Right. It's just a secret
it's the
order.
First rule of Fight Club.
Yeah, they're
Everybody knows
not
that.
the sloppy ass stupid skinheads, right? They're a whole different level of discipline.
They're the not proud boys.
Yeah. So really fascinating. But how about that?
Great. I'll sleep
Wow.
well. I'm going to sleep great tonight. Thank
Yeah,
you.
fantastic. Thanks for that. And
Yep.
with that, let's move on.
Doug. If well, you're a little younger than me, but if you're like me, a child of the '80s, right? I grew up with the youth pop culture. What I was allowed to see as a young Mormon, which wasn't a lot.
Like the GoBots and
He-Man, G.I. Joe. But what was a huge thing in movies and culture at the time was the Coreys. Right, you had Corey Haim, you had Corey Feldman. They were ride or die together, right? Those two little cuties, and they were just in everything. The Lost Boys, and probably other movies that I can't remember, but it was all about the Coreys.
The Goonies.
I do remember
the
that. The
Goonies.
Goonies.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
well Corey Haim wasn't in the Goonies.
Sure, he was. We'll just say he was.
That was Sean Astin.
No. I think they're the same person.
Oh, okay, fine, fair enough.
Corey Haim and Sean
Samwise
Astin were the same person.
Gamgee is the same person. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if did you enjoy the Coreys, Daniel?
Not as much as you did, but
I mean,
probably.
I mean, only one of them made it this far, and the truth is, while one of them did die, I don't know which one of them actually made it this far. I don't know if Corey Feldman, who lived, I don't know if he's the one that we can say made it, because
he's going the distance.
Yeah. Anyway, look, I am going to talk about a Corey too, but before I get there, I wanted to talk a little bit about something I recently watched, and I think you guys may have watched at least some of this too. I watched as much as I was able to stomach of a debate. It took place a few weeks ago on Zoom and pitted friend of the show and FUFRF attorney Andrew Seidel against Christian gasbag and 80s kid adventure movie bad guy Tom Trento.
I only watched the closing statement, which was beautiful.
Yes.
Andrew did an extraordinary job with that.
Yeah. Throughout the whole thing, Andrew was clear and incisive and fair in his treatment of the subject, where Trento, unfortunately, couldn't even see or hear Andrew, and instead was having a totally different debate with the Andrew-shaped straw man that he had set up next to his webcam. Which is to say that he completely ignored the reality of the person he was debating and just plowed forward with a plan he had crafted ahead of time. That plan had nothing to do with the ostensible topic of the debate, nor did he address or even acknowledge anything that the good Mr. Seidel had said. After a while, the whole thing descended into chaos, with Trento trying desperately to trap Andrew with multiple choice questions that didn't include the correct answers, and throwing tantrums when he wouldn't just choose one of the options and shut up.
Well, how else is he going to win a debate?
Right? Exactly. I wouldn't bother watching the whole thing if I were any of you, though, as Uncle Mark says, Andrew's opening and closing speeches both knock it out of the park.
Yeah,
so
he's so brilliant and decent.
Yeah, and easy on the eyes too. He's a handsome
fella, isn't he?
If you like those clean cut types. The reason I bring this up is because it is the latest for me in a very long line of moments where a believer has decided that the atheist that they've constructed in their mind is obviously far more honest and real than anything an actual atheist might say. So they just ignore the real people that are right in front of them and valiantly go to battle against the straw man army of their imaginations. They applaud each other as they bravely bravely slay scarecrow after scarecrow, never bothering themselves with the distant sounds of real, honest arguments. Meanwhile, we non-believers sit on our park benches watching the whole live-action role play as they stab their dull prop swords into dummies with our names scrawled on them. And then they go off to regale their churches with the noble story of their righteous victory over the savage heathens. It's a tale as old as time.
Yeah.
And today, I'm going to prove that. I'm going to talk about an OG straw man that goes back more than 2,000 years. But only if you actually believe what Mormons believe. Otherwise, it goes back 200 years. Because that's when Joseph Smith fabricated a pretend ancient record of Jews in the Americas. For today's lesson, we're going to talk about one of the great characters in the Book of Mormon. Not that there's much competition. Korihor.
One of the Corys. Yeah.
So, Korihor comes to us and leaves us in a single chapter of the Book of Alma. For anyone stupid enough to have attempted to have read the Book of Mormon all the way through, you know that Alma, which is book 9 of 15, is the one where you finally lose the will to live completely. Coming in at 63 chapters, it's almost twice as long as any of the other books. Our boy Korihor comes in, joins the party in chapter 30. So,
yeah, it's a brutal book.
It's a slog, man.
Yeah, I think we often encourage our listeners to go ahead and go to the source material and learn stuff for yourself, obviously, but don't read this book.
Not this book.
Good God.
Yeah, believe me, don't read this book. We're doing it so you don't have to.
Exactly.
So, chapter 30 starts in the land of Zarahemla, which is one of our favorite ones, with the Nephites, who are God's good, white, and delightsome little boys and girls, burying their dead after a huge battle with the Lamanites, who are God's dark-skinned baddies. The surviving Lamanites are kicked out. The Nephites have some days of fasting and mourning and prayer, and then, since they got rid of all the dark people, quote, there began to be continual peace throughout the land.
Oh my God. Not racist at all.
No. Shut up. Literally everybody was good and kept all the commandments and shit.
It's weird that Cliven Bundy loves this book, isn't it? I just had that random thought.
Right?
Yeah.
Strange.
Well, and it's such a trope throughout the Book of Mormon, especially in the Book of Alma, but throughout, that entire populations just all act as one character.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no individuality.
Or there's no faction.
100%.
Yeah, there's no factions. There's no nuance. It's just like
difference of opinion.
Yeah, the people
Right.
were righteous, the people were evil. The people were evil, the people were righteous. Fucking.
Well, and that's exactly it. This is a classic Joseph Smith move here. You fix all of the problems, literally make everything perfect for years, then realize that you have to have conflict to have a story, and
Right.
go.
They turn their hearts away from God again.
Yeah.
Right. Which does make me wonder how many angry, frustrated grumbles Martin Harris heard from behind the curtain as Joseph was dictating. I imagine it to be something like this. Joseph says, and thus the people did have no disturbance in all the 16th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. And it came to pass that in the commencement of the 17th year of the reign of the judges, there was continual peace. So
Shit.
It's amazing.
Well-
It's amazing how long you can stretch out. Nothing happened.
right, exactly.
Or Martin Harris is probably like, "Hey, Joseph, is it going to pick up anytime soon?"
Right.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Sure. Let's take lunch, and then we'll come back and pick it up. So anyway, when they did get back from lunch, Joseph introduces the story of Korihor. And it's a hell of an introduction. Verse 6 comes out swinging at this guy. Quote, there came a man into the land of Zarahemla, and he was Antichrist, for he began to preach unto the people against the prophecies which had been spoken by the prophets concerning the coming of Christ. Boom! That's what passes for character building in this book.
Yep.
He's new in town, and he's Antichrist.
He's wearing a sign that says bad guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And he literally might be one of the most nuanced characters in the Book of Mormon.
It's
Yeah,
amazing
we'll get to that.
In that moment that Joseph Smith didn't invent a pre-Columbian railroad for him to tie a woman to.
100%. Yes, exactly. Now, he's not the Antichrist, mind you. He's just Antichrist.
Yeah.
Later, he's
again it.
Later, he's an Antichrist. So, lots of ways to use that phrase, I guess. Anyway, the point is that we're supposed to hate him, and that's about all we know about him for a minute. Then the book answers the question we're all asking, which is, if he's preaching against the prophecies, why isn't he getting his ass kicked? Well,
Yeah.
Now we get to several verses about the Zarahemla criminal justice system.
Oh, my God.
It turns out that in ancient Mesoamerica, you were legally allowed to believe or not believe. Isn't that nice? And there are several verses justifying this position because old Joseph was clearly deeply ambivalent about whether heathens should be allowed to speak or not.
Right.
But the Nephites of Zarahemla landed on, yes, you can be a disgusting, evil, Satan-worshipping shitbag atheist if you want to, perv. And the good book gives a series of reasons why God wants it that way. God wants an open society where people are free to believe what they want and they have the legal right to talk about their beliefs freely. Put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Anyway, 7 verses later, we're back to this Antichrist, which in this book is hyphenated with both words capitalized, by the way. I don't know why. He finally gets a name, the name Korihor. And even though we just had an entire opening arguments episode about alternative religious views in Nephite law, it is once again emphasized that he's legally allowed to do this no matter how mad that makes you. Anyway, Korihor is preaching that there will be no Christ. Remember, this takes place before Jesus. This is like BC 75 or something like that. So they're still waiting for this Messiah. And that there's no God, and that there's no evidence that the prophecies are true. He says, quote, "O ye that are bound down under a foolish and vain hope, why do ye yoke yourselves with such foolish things? Why do you look for a Christ? For no man can know anything which is to come. Behold, these things which ye call prophecies, which ye say are handed down by holy prophets, behold, they are foolish traditions of your fathers." So,
I like this guy.
Yeah.
that all feels pretty right.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Great. And here's what's interesting about this chapter. Joseph Smith, like all the screenwriters of all of the best god-awful movie episodes, has to thread a needle here. If he wants the character to be at all believable, which, it's the Book of Mormon, why start now, but whatever, he has to try to make him make some sense. But he can't make too much sense, or, readers might realize that he's actually, the one who's right. So
Right.
Joseph Smith throws in a classic atheist straw man, which is people who leave the church just want to sin. Now, this one's ubiquitous in the modern era. If you Google why do people become atheists or why do people leave the church, and you find a Christian website's answer, I guarantee you somewhere on that page you'll find this. They just want to sin.
Yeah.
Now, nobody that I've ever met or even heard of became an atheist because they wanted to sin.
No. Well, and religious people have no problem sinning. They do it all the time.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
they go back to
exactly.
church on Sunday. It's no fucking biggie.
Right.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact,
consider
there
the
was a-
source of this material we're reading right now.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, totally. Now, I will say this. There are some folks who eventually noticed that God's rules about sex were stupid, and that led them to realize that God might not be real, and then they went on to have a delightful and less fettered sex life. But that's not leaving because you want to sin. That's leaving because you realize that you were lied to and then sinning.
Well,
There's
and
a difference.
leaving
And then it's
aside,
not sinning.
It's not sinning.
Right.
The central contradiction there is that if I'm not in religion, those religiously mandated sins are not sins.
Right.
It's
right.
just having a drink or getting a
though
blowjob.
they often though they will often say, I've heard many a believer say, well, you still believe, you just want to sin, so you pretend like you don't believe. Also put a pin in that. Anyway, old Korihor said, quote, there could be no atonement made for the sins of men, but every man fared in this life according to the management of the creature, I guess meaning we're all just animals. Therefore, every man prospered according to his genius, and that every man conquered according to his strength, and whatsoever a man did was no crime. Right.
Yeah.
What atheists believe is that you can do whatever you want, and since there's no God to tell you what's right or wrong, there's no such thing as crime, and everything is a goddamn free-for-all.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how I've lived my life entirely.
It's what we're all about. It's why the prisons are packed with atheists.
Yeah.
Positively overflowing. Now, regardless of that stupidity, apparently a guy talking mostly reasonably about the logical problems of magic daddies in the sky and wizards predicting the future was a welcome diversion in perfect Stepfordian Zarahemla, and a bunch of people started listening and liking what they were hearing. And women and men immediately turned to, quote, committing whoredoms.
Yeah.
That's what
Corey
happens.
whoredoms.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh.
Huh?
He's got his own. He should get a T-shirt.
Huh? Well, that's his podcast.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Anywho, Korihor didn't stay in Zarahemla. He took a show on the road. He went to the land of Jershon to preach to the people of Ammon, who used to be Lamanites. They're the evil dark-skinned ones, remember? But here's a twist. These guys were more wise than the Nephites. It literally says that. And they immediately bound Korihor and dragged him in front of Ammon, who was the high priest, who ordered him to be, quote, carried out of the land. Okay. But Uncle Dan, didn't we spend an oddly long amount of time talking about how it was good and God ordained that people be free to preach whatever they want? Shut up! Yeah,
This
literally.
it's a different time now, idiot.
Yeah, exactly. Literally, I guess, I just love that the place where they are more wise is the place where they're going against God's idea of how the law is supposed to go. But anyway.
Well, I also love the idea that Martin Harris was probably from behind the curtain going, hey, you know how you wrote that stuff about, freedom of speech? Don't
Right.
you want to set up a theocracy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shit.
It's literally this chapter goes back and forth on that issue a dozen times. It's your head starts to spin. Anyway, then Korihor tried his shtick in the land of Gideon, and they bound him and took him to the high priest and the chief judge of the land named Gedona. Now, I'm going to read a pretty big section of this because it's the first time we actually hear what Korihor says, and well, it's pretty fucking compelling. So this is him talking to Gedona, the high priest. Ye say that this people is a free people. Behold, I say they are in bondage. Ye say that those ancient prophecies are true. Behold, I say you do not know that they are true. Ye say that these people, that this people is a guilty and fallen people because of the transgression of a parent. Behold, I say that a child is not guilty because of its parents. And ye also say that Christ shall come, but behold, I say ye do not know that you do not know that there shall be a Christ. And ye also say that he shall be slain for the sins of the world, and thus ye lead the people. You lead away this people after the foolish traditions of your fathers, and according to your own desires, and you keep them down even as they were in bondage, that ye might glut yourselves with the labors of their hands, and they durst not look up with boldness, and that they durst not enjoy their rights and privileges. Yea, they durst not make use of that which is their own, lest they should offend their priests, who do yoke them according to their desires, and have brought them to believe by their traditions and their dreams and their whims and their visions and their pretend mysteries, that they should, if they did not do according to their words, offend some unknown being who they say is God, a being who never has been seen or known, who never was nor ever will be. To me, that is a pretty shocking slam dunk.
Korihor, do you want to come on the show?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, excellent work.
Yeah, reading from an outsider's perspective, that is some hard-hitting skepticism.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And
the high priest...
very reasonable.
Totally reasonable.
Yeah.
Anyway, the high priest did what all believers do when they hear a skeptic challenge their beliefs. He told Korihor that his heart was hard and shipped him back to Zarahemla, because that's good writing. Why did we leave anyway, if we're just going back? To stand before the big boss, Alma. Skun-dun-dun. Now, Alma's is the guy who's going to set things right. He's the great, wise high priest who has the apologetics to put Korihor Hitchens in his place. First, he tackles the claim that the priests make money off the labor of the people. And for this, he uses the classic apologetic, nuh-uh, do not. He literally takes several paragraphs to say, I make my own money, so shut up. Then they get to the real stuff. Alma asks Korihor if he believes in God and in Christ. Korihor says, no.
Hasn't he made
Alma
that completely clear already?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, exactly. Alma starts to do the classic logical fallacy and says, what evidence have ye that there is no God, or that Christ cometh not? I say unto you that ye have none, save it is your word only. Thereby demonstrating that not only does he not understand who has the burden of proof, but that he doesn't recognize that his own arguments can be turned back to him. Because guess whose word only is also the only evidence for the other side?
Yep.
Then he makes his big proof that God does indeed exist. Things. You know, all the things. That's literally his argument. He's shocked that Korihor can't see it, frankly.
Yeah.
So Korihor does the final gambit. He asks for evidence that God is real. Show me a sign, he says, and I'll believe. Now, in real life, that is a 100% reasonable thing to ask.
Yeah.
But Alma's like, but the things, look at all the things. That's your goddamn sign. So Korihor just refuses to acknowledge the things and says that's not a very good argument. He's such a stubborn guy.
Yeah, it's Aquinas' 5 ways, right?
Right.
It's look, there is a world, someone made it. Look, the stars move, someone makes them. It's like, okay, that's pretty deep.
But
Great.
it's the same argument over and over again, obviously.
Yeah.
Where did it all come from?
Yeah. So this is the point in the story where it takes a Tarantino pivot, where we take one moment in this godforsaken book that feels slightly realistic, and we plunge it into adolescent doofus-style magic reality revenge stupidity. Alma says, you want a sign? I'll show you a sign. Since you won't shut up and stop ruining God for everybody, God will shut you up. And with that, Korihor is struck dumb permanently. And with that, Korihor, like a good and consistent skeptic that he has always been, admits in writing that he was wrong and that God must exist because he can't speak anymore.
Do you think he was carrying his own gold plate to jot that down on, or did they provide you with one in the court?
What's really funny, and I didn't write this, but what's really funny is that when they ask him, do you believe in God now? Somebody writes it to him as though he can't hear it.
Joseph Smith was such a dumbass.
Oh my
good
God.
Just
Lord.
ask him. It's fine.
That's
Anyway,
so great.
They write it to him.
Anyway, yes, there's another popular believer straw man right there, because about how he always they throw in this straw man about how he always secretly believed deep down, and that Satan tricked him by coming to him like an angel to tell him that there was no God, because.
Well, if he was an
As we
angel,
all
wouldn't
know-
he think there was a God?
Right, yeah. Non-belief so often starts with an angelic visitation. Yeah,
That was my road to skepticism as a supernatural being appearing
exactly.
to me.
But honestly, really,
God.
who's the bad guy here? Korihor has conflicting beliefs based on lack of evidence, and once he gets good evidence, even though it fucks him up for life, he acknowledges it. But that's not the takeaway that we're supposed to get. No, Korihor is pronounced wicked and ends up going door to door begging for food because apparently mute people can't work. And everyone who has believed him reverts back to being a good little church mouse. And eventually, Korihor was viciously trampled to death.
Oh my God.
And lest you think that I'm skewing how the book presents this fate, I'll leave you with the actual final verse of the chapter, which has a rare moral of the story style ending. And thus we see the end of him who perverteth the ways of the Lord. Thus we see that the devil will not support his children at the last day, but doth speedily drag them down to hell. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Yeah, so he should stand as a shining example of the power of the gospel, right?
Right.
And he should be like that's what they should be teaching missionaries in the MTC. Is look, Korihor was convinced. It took striking him mute, and then there were some scribblings in the courtroom, yada yada. Right. But look, the hardest of hearts can be changed. And according to their own belief system, Korihor became a good guy.
Theoretically,
Am I wrong?
yeah.
Well, yeah, but I think the takeaway from this story, at least from their perspective, is don't ask questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Truly.
Literally, it's meant to chill, to put a chill into the spine of anyone who would dare ask for a sign or ask for evidence or ask for any kind of like reality-based reason to believe this.
Well, and I don't know, Dan, if you're gonna go here, but I do know a lot of people who had a faith crisis because of this story.
Oh, really?
In the same way that I know of some people who had faith crises because of the story of Jesus and the fig tree.
Huh.
Because like it says in that story, it wasn't fig season. Jesus went up to the fig tree. It didn't have figs, so he fucked it up.
Yeah.
And in this story, like Korihor is making valid points. He has questions. He wants to know, and God strikes him dumb.
Right.
And he says, I believe, and it ends up being a poor beggar.
And
Like-
trampled
And
to
getting
death.
trampled to death.
Yeah, like,
Literally.
So what's the point of changing your mind?
Yeah.
What value is there?
Yeah, and if you read this story and you're like, okay, here's the problem I'm having. The lesson of the story is I'm not supposed to ask questions, but the story has caused me to have questions. What the fuck am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
Boy, it's a mess.
It's a fun little thing, and again, every time we do a story in the Book of Mormon, it's just a lesson in why we edit, why we don't
Yeah.
claim that our book was directly translating from another book that's directly from God, and thus make it so that we can't actually edit it down.
Yeah,
and make
now
it
they're
better.
stuck with this garbage, this mess of a story forever. It's an albatross around their necks, but there you go.
There you go.
All right. Well, the third Corey.
Yep, go get out there and have a Korihor of a time, and let's move on. Hey, Uncle Mark.
Yes, sir.
I know that you recently crossed a border that is somewhat impenetrable right now because we're still in the middle of a pandemic.
I managed to slide through into a closed country across the largest undefended border in the world, which is quite something.
You just got to lube up a lot.
Yeah,
And
you gotta make a run for it.
Anyway, the one of the things that you did before you went there was to get yourself a shot in the arm.
I sure did, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, and I've got my appointment. I finally got an appointment because I finally in Utah. I'm in an age group that's going to get them. So in a week and a half, I'm going to be getting my first shot.
That's good. So they finally lowered it to uncles.
Yeah, exactly. It's now exactly. Not like Uncle Mark old people style, but like us young and spry uncles can get them too now here.
You teenagers.
In Utah.
That's right.
But the question is, do I really want it?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there.
No.
It just seems like preventing this disease is not a good idea for some reason. And I'm not sure why, but I'm pretty sure that, Uncle Doug, you can tell me.
Well, I'm going to do my best to convince you otherwise.
Okay.
Like Uncle Dan just referenced, Uncle Mark and I have both been vaccinated. I'm so happy to hear about that, Dan. I didn't know that you're getting your vaccine in short order.
Yeah.
That's great news. And once the government has managed to get all podcasters vaccinated, they can move on to doctors, nurses, teachers, and the general public. So
all
hang
the
in
non-essential workers.
That's right.
Right.
So hopefully many of you out there have either received your first vaccination or are getting close to being able to.
Something tells me Joe Rogan's not going to be getting one, but that's a subject for another day.
Because the needle would break trying to penetrate his thick fucking skin. It's crazy that it's basically been 1 year since this all started, depending on obviously where you are. And so it's hard not to take stock of what we've all been through in these last 12 interminable months. But as the experts keep telling us, we are not through this yet, and whether we actually get out of this depends on the vast majority of us doing the right things. We still need to wash our hands, practice proper social distancing, stay away from parties, sporting events, and concerts, wear masks diligently, and get the fucking vaccine as soon as we all can. There is still a real possibility that this virus could mutate into something that makes all this sacrifice and effort for nothing. So the subject of my segment today could not be more timely. Today, I want to talk about anti-vaxxers and the anti-vax movement.
Yeah.
Look, on this show, we have talked about every form and fashion of woo out there, and anti-vax is definitely a woo, but most woos are basically harmless. If you want to get your palm read, go for it. If you don't want to leave the house until you've read your daily horoscope, who cares? If you want to try and communicate with your dead relatives via a Ouija board, I'll light the candles for you. If you want to stick a jade egg up your recently steamed vagine, cram the fucker up there. Just don't do it during allergy season. So,
Jade is hypoallergenic, isn't it?
of course, these woos can be harmful if, say, by following some fortune cookie prediction, you make bad decisions. And there are woos that are inherently harmful, like trepidation, or trepanation, or grimace conjuring.
Yeah, being reluctant is not a woo.
Yeah, exactly. But there is only one woo that is on the World Health Organization's top 10 list of global health threats, and that's anti-vax, or as they put it, vaccine hesitancy. Want to know what else is on that list? Well, COVID-19, obviously, poor third world healthcare, Ebola, dengue fever, HIV, and climate change. That's right.
Guy Fieri.
Guy Fieri. That's right. The World Health Organization sees anti-vax as dangerous as AIDS and climate change.
Jesus.
There is no real way to know how many people die every year due to anti-vax and the damage it causes. But the WHO believes that at least 1.5 million people a year could be saved if vaccine distribution was marginally improved. And one of the biggest impediments to that marginal improvement is the anti-vax movement. So, yeah. The numbers get big real fast. As we'll discuss, the anti-vax movement could actually derail our efforts to defeat COVID-19, plunging us back into the pit where we were all a year ago, and killing millions more people.
Yeah.
Unlike the viruses of the body this movement seeks to protect, anti-vax is a virus of the mind, and as such, might be one of the deadliest viruses in history. Underlying all of this is the fact that anti-vax is stupid, belligerent, anti-science, often racist, and easily disprovable. Not only that, but it's also inconsistently applied, illogical to its core, and poorly thought out if any of its adherents actually think about it at all.
Oh, they think hard. They have developed many, many vociferous ways of defending their position. So,
Well, if you say so. But we'll
I'm
get
not saying
there.
good or smart ways, just many, many ways.
Well, let's agree on loud.
Okay.
Unlike other woos, this one has to be confronted and defeated, or we're doomed. I would never tell you to slap the tarot cards out of the hands of the yoga instructor you're trying to have sex with, but if you know any anti-vaxxers, you should really talk to them and try and change their mind.
Yeah.
If this virus of the mind is not confronted and treated, it could kill us all. So, let's dig in, shall we? As early as the 10th century in China, someone noticed that those who had previously had a mild case of a deadly disease were less susceptible to that disease later. This led to a practice called variolation, wherein pus or scabs from an infected person are blown up the nasal passages or rubbed on scratches on the skin of an uninfected individual. I know
Which
this
is
sounds
just as sexy as it sounds.
I know this sounds disgusting, but honestly, it was probably the least disgusting thing to have happen to you on any given day in the 10th century. Why this practice worked and would remain a mystery for centuries, but by the 16th and 17th century, it was in fairly wide use in China, India, and Turkey before making its way to England in the 18th century. Now, here's the thing. 18th century England was certainly somewhat enlightened, a somewhat enlightened place for the world back then, but that doesn't mean it wasn't still barbaric.
Yeah.
So some of the first true scientific experiments of vaccines were carried out on children, prisoners, and slaves. None of whom
Well,
were
who
in,
else are you going to do it on? Perfectly
it's-
good, like grown-up white people?
On
consenting-
children?
Yeah. This would
They're
unfortunately,
pretty disposable back then, the children.
Wow, this is a bad show for kids, man.
yeah, right, no doubt.
Yeah.
This would unfortunately be a part of the development and experimentation of vaccines for well over 100 years, and as we'll see, these evil practices would become a small bit of the fodder that would become the anti-vaxxer movement. But before we get to that, let's talk about what a game-changing development vaccine science was for the human race. Prior to their development, when a disease crossed over from some animal to humanity, all we could really do was just wait for it to run its course. Outbreaks of cholera, influenza, and of course
That's known as the Trump plan.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, outbreaks of cholera, influenza, and of course bubonic plague would kill millions of people per outbreak. The version of the bubonic plague known as the Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people between 1346 and 1353.
Jesus.
Yeah, bad
Yeah,
bad
but they
stuff.
were just weak.
HIV/AIDS is still a global pandemic and has killed more than 36 million people since 1981. Of course, there is not a vaccine yet for this disease, but the therapeutics are incredible, if expensive, and HIV/AIDS is very preventable. The reasons that it has and continues to spread, basically racism and religious stupidity, are very much a part of the anti-vax movement, as we'll discuss. But yeah, I mean, that you know, we were all alive during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, although, you know, pretty young and pretty dumb. But that was a terribly preventable disease that was treated as a gay disease, a black disease, an African disease, and was able to spread. So that's good stuff.
Yeah. And when people died of it, it was horrid. It was absolutely horrible.
Terrible.
So the fact that these therapeutics now exist and guys that caught it in the original wave are dying of old age is incredible.
It's incredible, and it bears mentioning, we'll get back to this.
Yeah.
That's not happening everywhere that AIDS is a problem, but
Of course it's not.
Right,
Of course it's
exactly.
not.
So in the 1880s, Louis Pasteur brought what was a pretty chaotic and unorganized field of science into the modern age when he developed microbial fermentation and pasteurization. Since then, we have developed vaccines for puerperal fever, rabies, anthrax, cholera, polio, measles, tetanus, smallpox, chickenpox, influenza, HPV, hepatitis, Lyme disease, rubella, whooping cough, rotavirus, mumps, diphtheria, dengue, malaria, tuberculosis, among others. So it's been a game-changing development for the human species.
Yeah.
This, of course, brings us to today and the emergence of COVID-19. As we have all become acutely aware, this disease is incredibly contagious, having spread from Wuhan, China to every corner of the globe in a matter of months. As of the time of this record, COVID-19 has killed 2.69 million people worldwide, with the U.S. accounting for 539,000 of those deaths. So we're number one.
Yeah.
And because of the incompetence of national governments, the selfishness of far too many, and the vast amounts of disinformation already in the psychological bloodstream from the anti-vax movement, this disease was poised to simply just wash around the globe over and over until like new and more resistant and more deadly strains evolved. And let's not be too optimistic. This could still happen. We are in a desperate
Yeah,
we're
happening now. Right?
We're in a desperate foot race against these variants as we speak. The only way we can beat this virus back and stop the carnage, let alone get back to some sort of normalcy, is for enough of us and our fellow humans all over the world, not just in our own countries, to get the vaccines that are now available to reach herd immunity. Now, we've all heard that term. It is, of course, the critical mass of humans that have to have immunity such that the disease cannot spread with impunity.
Excuse me, the former president called it herd mentality. So,
he did.
You're,
he did
you're
indeed.
wrong.
In the most apt Freudian slip in history. Once herd immunity is reached, the reproduction number reaches zero. This is called R0, right, or R0. Right now, COVID-19 is between R2 and R3, meaning that each person who gets it can infect 2 to 3 other people. In order to reach herd immunity, or R0, with COVID-19, between 50 and 67% of the population needs the vaccine. In America, this means 164 million to 224 million people need to be vaccinated.
But more would be better.
More, always better. This is the baseline just to stop the spread.
Right.
But remember, this is a global pandemic, and the longer this disease persists anywhere, the higher the chances that dangerous variants can evolve and defeat the vaccines. So to win this, 50 to 67% of the populations of England, China, Iraq, Togo, and Benin need to be vaccinated. Worldwide, that is 3.8 to 5.1 billion people need to get vaccinated, and fast. As of now, 77 or so million Americans have received at least their first dose of the vaccine, which is a good start. But globally, only 410 million people have been vaccinated so far. That's bad. That's only 8 to 11% of where we need to be. We are not through this yet, and there is no time to spare, and there is certainly not time for the disinformation campaign by the anti-vax movement and its erstwhile allies. The mere fact that we have these vaccines at all is truly incredible. And I've heard, including us, have referred to it as miraculous because that word by its very definition is meant to apply to events that defy explanation or expectations. But this was not a miracle. This was the achievement of generations of scientists and the body of work they have all contributed to. So let's talk about these vaccines for a second because it will inform where we end up. While the COVID-19 virus was new to humanity, hence the term novel, there was a robust body of knowledge of coronaviruses out there due to the previous coronaviruses like SARS and MERS.
Right.
This data was shared globally in an open source initiative called GISAID, or GISAID, which shares genomic data on influenza viruses with anybody that wants it. Because of that body of knowledge, we were not starting out from zero. But even still, not only had it taken years to develop vaccines in the past, there was not any vaccine in existence for any kind of coronavirus. So the challenge was extreme. As the pandemic enveloped the globe in early 2020, scientists were able to isolate COVID-19's genetic sequence on January 11th, 2020, which in itself is incredible. Next, there was...
that's really quick.
Super, super quick. Next, there was an unprecedented collaborative effort undertaken by national governments, drug companies, and research universities to find a vaccine. The main vehicles for this effort were the WHO and an initiative by the G20 called Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. So these are the two main bodies that kind of tried to coordinate all this research.
I think you mean President Trump's Warp Speed initiative.
Well,
I think that's what you're...
I'll get to that for sure.
Okay.
And yes, that's the WHO that said Donald Trump pulled us from in May of 2020 because he needed to blame someone for his failures, and this is true because they refused to call it the China virus, which is something that would have no evil consequences at all, right?
Yeah, that hasn't turned into anything even shittier.
Nope, not at all.
It's been great.
Yeah.
So Uncle Dan mentioned Warp Speed. In May, Trump announced Operation Warp Speed, which was an effort to fast-track funding, clinical trials, approval, and distribution of potential vaccines. It was named Operation Warp Speed because Donald Trump is a child.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it was not.
But also, do you think he ever watched Star Trek? Like, that doesn't.
I'm guessing that was a like Jared Kushner name
or Don Jr. or something.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Like, he doesn't seem to. He couldn't watch something like that and glean anything from it. He's just too fucking self-absorbed.
Exactly. Yeah, the fact that it wasn't Operation Trump Speed is pretty surprising. So the thing is, it's not a wholly bad idea to do this, but Trump ran it, unsurprisingly, like he's run everything else in his life.
Into the ground?
Basically. So although Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson did take funding from Warp Speed to develop their vaccines, Pfizer did not wanting to infect, pun intended, their research with the Trump administration's incompetence. As for the distribution phase of Warp Speed, Trump did basically nothing.
Right.
God only knows how this would have panned out had he won the election.
Point of order, he didn't do nothing. He took full credit for it.
That's exactly right.
That's true.
That's not nothing.
Well, and that's what's so funny. Not only, he's claiming credit to this day for the vaccines.
Well, I think Biden should give him some credit and respect, because we all remember how much credit and respect Trump gave the previous administration
for the economy. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So Trump is claiming credit for this to this day, which sets up one of the many contradictions in this story. The foot soldiers in Trump's army are by and large QAnon-believing anti-vaxxers. And here we have Trump winking at them while demanding credit for the vaccines.
Yeah.
And very tepidly encouraging people to get vaccinated, but keeping his own vaccination secret. This will not be
but we know that the Q brain is incredible. Incoherency it's not a problem.
Truly. And I remain convinced that Trump didn't show a picture of him getting the vaccine because he didn't want to see him in a short-sleeve shirt with his shirt pulled up. I believe that.
Right.
Well, none of us wanted to see
That's
that.
fair.
So I thank him for it.
That's fair. So with all that context, let's get to the anti-vaxxers. Since the first vaccinations, there have been anti-vaxxers. There were those who objected to having scabs blown up their nostrils because it was gross, it was weird, and no one understood why it worked, or in many cases because religious leaders railed against it. These religious arguments ran the gambit from science is devil worship to viruses were created by God to punish the wicked, and any attempt to stop them was fighting against the will of God. All true.
Right. It's the same reason that when Ben Franklin put a lightning rod on wherever it was, Town Hall in Philadelphia or whatever, and all the churches invade against it as subverting God's will, and then 2 years later they all had lightning rods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the 19th century, there were anti-vaccination leagues that sprung up in the U.S. and the U.K. that slowed down the vaccination campaigns against smallpox and led to untold numbers of unnecessary deaths. Similar leagues appeared all around the world as that campaign continued. Most of these leagues focused on what would become the main fear of all anti-vaxxers, harm to children. Most current anti-vaxxers fall into two buckets, with one being far larger and more nefarious than the other. The biggest group...
Can we just keep them in the buckets?
If we could seal it, then that would be great. The biggest group are those that believe that there is some conspiracy or several conspiracies behind vaccines. And we'll get to that.
Right.
These range from the profit motive of the pharmaceutical and medical industry all the way to alien experimentation.
Of course.
Whatever their particular belief is, it's based on a belief in dark forces with no regard for public health. The second, much smaller bucket are those that simply don't care enough to get vaccinated. They don't think they're the problem, so they don't feel any need to be part of the solution. So, while the latter is certainly a cause for concern, it's the former group that is a global crisis. And there are different kinds of anti-vaxxers. There's some who completely deny and eschew any kind of vaccination. There are some that want to, spread out vaccinations over time or only get this one or that one. So they kind of run the gambit, but they pretty much all believe the same things. They're all looking at the same materials. And so we're going to keep them in a single group for the purpose of this discussion. Because whatever you're doing, if you're slowing down vaccines or you're not getting them, the effect is the same.
Right.
Yeah. The modern iteration of this insanity has its roots in the campaign to vaccinate against diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. I hope I said that right.
Pertussis, I think.
In the 1970s, conflicting and spurious reports appeared in the UK press that there was significant neurological after effects from this vaccine in children. Not true. But in the hysteria that followed, a film called Vaccination Roulette and a book called A Shot in the Dark hit the market. These two works describe dark conspiracies, junk
When was this, Doug?
This was in the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s.
Oh, the 70s. Okay.
Yeah, so this what we call the anti-vax movement isn't that old.
It's
like
older than I thought, actually.
Well, it didn't get its real. We'll get to really where it kind of got its injection, so to speak.
Right.
But both these films the film and this book were complete hooey, but they're still around today. They're still in circulation. Then came the inciting incident of the modern anti-vax movement. In 1998, a British physician named Andrew Wakefield released a paper in The Lancet called Iliad Lymphoid Nodular Hyperplasia, Nonspecific Colitis, and Pervasive Developmental Disorder in Children. Try saying that 3 times.
Yeah.
Or just once. The paper claimed a link between vaccinations for measles, mumps, and rubella and autism in children.
Right.
Given that Wakefield was a doctor at the time, he's not anymore.
Right.
And the paper sounded scientific, it caused a major stir, one that we are still feeling today. I don't want to spend too much time on Wakefield because he is truly one of the world's greatest monsters and quite literally may have as much blood on his hands as any of history's greatest villains.
Yeah, he's essentially a baby murderer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except to say that it turns out that he was paid by various anti-vax organizations to produce the paper, and the paper itself was so completely spurious that Lancet retracted it and Wakefield was stripped of his medical license.
Wow.
That hasn't stopped him, though. He was behind the quote-unquote documentary Vaxxed that came out in the 2000s with the tagline, "The movie they don't want you to see."
Gotta love that. That's all conspiracy theorists. That's catnip right there.
Exactly. And it's basically the Citizen Kane of the anti-vax movement. Go ahead and watch the trailer for this monstrous nightmare if you're up to it. And if you're not filled with boiling hate for Wakefield, I don't want to know you. It's nefarious, it's manipulative, it's grotesque, it's shocking.
Yeah, the God-Awful Movies guys did it, right?
Yeah,
And I think they pounded it like a nail.
It's horrible. And, not for nothing, but because, autism is tragic and it's very difficult for families of autistic people to raise autistic children. And again, I'm not trying to shame or if anyone out there is offended by that, I don't mean that by any stretch.
Yeah, I would ask to modify tragic. I think it's just simply a different way of being that can be more challenging.
Yeah, of course. But to try and manipulate people with autistic children, autistic family members, and then use that video to manipulate others, I think is tragic. I think it's fucked up.
And completely missing from the conversation is the fact that autism is way better than most of the diseases which vaccines prevent.
Google a fucking picture of smallpox.
So in the research
or polio.
In the research for this, I saw a lot of what's so fucked up is I saw a lot of photos about this stuff from recent, like not pictures of people with smallpox in 1890.
Smallpox, has it reoccurred?
Smallpox hasn't, but polio has had some outbreaks, stuff like that, because of this fucking shit. So the sequel to this piece of shit Vaxxed movie, Vaxxed 2, The People's Truth,
Electric Boogaloo,
was released in November of 2019, mere months before the COVID pandemic. And I don't want to wish ill on people, so I'm going to stop talking about Wakefield right now. But this fear that these vaccines caused autism was based on the fact, pounded in these documentaries, that these vaccines contained trace amounts of mercury in the form of a chemical called thimerosal, which contains 49% methyl mercury. However, so little thimerosal was used in these vaccines that it came nowhere near a dose that could potentially cause harm. And in fact, in 2003, the Danish researchers conducted a study involving thousands of children who received vaccines containing thimerosal and thousands who received vaccines that contained none, and they found that the instances of autism was exactly the same in both groups. These vaccines, thimerosal, methylmercury, are not causing autism. But thimerosal has been removed from almost every major vaccine simply due to the public perception.
Yeah.
So this fear of the unfortunate truth, though, is this fear of vaccines and medical science being less than forthright and ethical is not entirely without cause. I mentioned earlier that the first vaccination experiments were carried out on slaves, children, and prisoners. Not good. Then, of course,
I don't want slaves and prisoners to get it, but I'm just wondering why the children are thrown in there.
I think because
they're
well,
just
you know
useless?
why? No, I think it's because a lot of these diseases struck children.
Childhood. Okay.
So they're like, oh, we'll just use children to experiment with. Right. Then, of course, there were the Tuskegee experiments.
Yeah. Right.
Carried out by the U.S. Public Health Service, Tuskegee University, and the CDC, in which African American men were told they were being given free health care to treat their syphilis, when in reality they were not. And for 40 years, they were observed to see what long-term syphilis would do to the human body.
Jesus.
Yeah, this led to the painful and miserable death of 128 of the men. It is one of the darkest chapters in American medical history, and has been a consistent reason for mistrust of the U.S. government, particularly by African Americans ever since, for good reason.
Yeah, there are some people that I think are justified in their hesitancy.
Yep.
But it's not fucking Jenny McCarthy and, her fucking social set of white upper class liberals in Hollywood. That's bullshit. Right. Yeah.
And we'll definitely we'll dig into that and hate on some people here in a minute.
Yeah.
But the Tuskegee experiments did lead to some major reforms in the U.S. health industry that remain today, including the creation of the Office for Human Research Protections within the Health and Human Services Administration. So these exist specifically to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. The body of law that exists because of Tuskegee is significant. But if your natural inclination is to mistrust the government, well, the Tuskegee experiments certainly don't help.
Yeah.
Another tenet of the anti-vax movement is something called vaccine overload. This is not a medical term, by the way, but essentially means that too much vaccine, or vaccines administered in too rapid a succession, will weaken the immune system and lead to adverse effects. Again, this is hogwash. Not only have so this is a really interesting fact. Not only have vaccines become so efficacious over the last several decades, such that the immunological components in the 14 vaccines administered to children today is less than 10% of what it was in the 7 vaccines administered in 1980.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the vaccine science has come a long way. And, not for nothing, but many vaccines must be administered on a specific timeline in order to work. Yet, vaccine overload, unfortunately, is still a common cry amongst anti-vaxxers. Ironically, the success of many vaccines is one of the main driving forces behind the anti-vax movement.
Trump actually brought that up at one of the debates before he was president.
Yeah.
Just saying, why don't we just space it out more?
Exactly.
Huh?
Yep. The success of many vaccines is ironically working against them. Quote, nobody has measles or polio anymore, so why do they keep injecting us with it? Is like a common trope of anti-vaxxers. So while the answer to this seems so obvious as to be mind-blowing, it's very common. Because of this, ironically, anti-vax sentiment has caused outbreaks of cholera, whooping cough, measles, mumps, and tuberculosis in the United States in the last several years.
All of which were basically eliminated.
Yep, exactly. I mentioned before that there is inherent racism to the anti-vax movement, because there is. Firstly, the anti-vax movement is heavily involved in all things conspiratorial, including QAnon, which are inherently racist. Nobody wants to be called a racist, especially racists. Most anti-vaxxers don't even want to be called that, preferring the moniker vaccine risk aware. And, anti-vax is by no means only a white phenomenon. However, the communities often hit first and hit hardest by disease outbreaks are black and brown communities. One of the best ways to combat and curb the spread of viral diseases is to get them where they start, which is oftentimes poorer countries. So back in 2014, we went to West Africa, not we, the U.S. went to West Africa to help prevent the spread of Ebola and successfully managed to keep this terrible disease from spreading out of control. Guess what? Anti-vaxxers are often against funding for efforts in these poor, often black and brown countries. We're seeing this in real time now with COVID-19. The reasons that black and brown communities are medically disadvantaged are many and systemic, but they are undeniable.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, if your unsubstantiated, ridiculous, and easily disprovable beliefs lead to bad outcomes in primarily black and brown communities, I don't know what else to call that but racist. Anti-vax just stinks of white privilege, front to back.
Yes, it does for sure.
Yet, and unfortunately, this movement has garnered some famous, kind of, and powerful adherents from minor celebrities like Jessica Biel, Jim Carrey, Jenny McCarthy, Alicia Silverstone, Jenna Elfman, Juliette Lewis, Charlie Sheen, rapist Danny Masterson, Selma Blair, and to a certain extent Bill Maher, all the way up to, God help me, Robert De Niro.
I know.
That one hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really? Why?
Well, I mean, I guess Bad Grandpa, I still want my money back for Bad Grandpa, but not
He's a good actor, but,
I never thought of him as an idiot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and not to mention, like you said, Uncle Mark, the 45th president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Among many tweets and outbursts on the subject, he tweeted in 2014, quote, "Healthy young child goes to doctor, gets pumped with massive shot of many vaccines, doesn't feel good and changes. Autism. Many such cases."
God.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel good and changes.
Yeah.
It was a good tweet, though. We got to give him credit for that. That's a solid tweet right there.
So yeah, the man in charge of Project Warp Speed, the government initiative to generate and distribute a vaccine from May of 2020 to January of 2021, was an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that vaccines are wildly safe and effective. There aren't many things that have such a consensus. If 4 out of 5 dentists recommend a toothbrush, you're going to go buy it. Yet that's nothing compared to the consensus on vaccines.
Right.
And not for nothing, we've harped on this before, the scientific method that led to vaccines is the same method that has led to air travel, smartphones, GPS, Viagra, the germ theory of disease, CRISPR, Jar Jar Binks, electricity, the internet, and grimace conjuring. You don't get to pick and choose here. You either believe in reputable science or you don't. And if you don't, that's fine, but please to be handing in your car keys and laptop.
Well, you can be skeptical about it, but once you examine the evidence,
right,
there's nothing to support the anti-vax position.
Exactly.
Well, except that they've got their own evidence, and
exactly,
and they've got a whole cadre of their own doctors and their own scientists who say the opposite things.
And go ahead, Doug.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and you may be going to mention this, but the Catholic Church, of course, just came out and said Catholics shouldn't get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because fetal tissue was part of the research.
I didn't even know that.
Yep.
I'm gonna go punch a hole in my television real quick.
Yeah.
So this brings us to our current crisis. Throughout the COVID pandemic, anti-vaxxers have been howling that this was a hoax or that it was a bioweapon that the Chinese either released on purpose or lost control of, and now that the vaccines are untested and dangerous. This was all spelled out in yet another quote-unquote documentary released in 2020 called Plandemic.
Oh, yeah.
This piece of propaganda pushed the conspiracy that COVID was man-made, that doctors and hospitals used the pandemic as a money-making venture, that masks actually cause disease, and that hydroxychloroquine is effective in stopping COVID. Absolutely none of this is true and is obviously counterproductive and dangerous, but if you know any anti-vaxxers, you can bet money they've seen it. So the filmmakers have been discredited. The whole thing is a piece of shit, but it's out there. And the final piece of the puzzle to talk about is the speed with which the COVID vaccines were developed rather than developed, because that's a big trope of anti-vaxxers is these came out too fast. Rather than seeing this as a towering achievement of medical science, anti-vaxxers point to it as proof that it's all rigged. Their point being that the government had them all along, or they weren't tested rigorously enough and we don't know what's in them.
Or both.
Or both.
They like to
or all the
They
things.
like to believe all the things.
Yeah, they can believe all the things at once.
Regardless of whether it makes any sense.
To the first point, I can only say that if Donald Trump had been hiding the vaccine this whole time and the early release would have guaranteed his victory, is there any person alive that thinks he would not have blurted it out at some point?
Totally.
Right.
To the second point, we do know what's in these vaccines. You can look it up online. The thing is, if you're not a medical or virological expert or can speak English like me, you're probably not going to fully understand the what's in this stuff. But again, I don't fully understand how the internal combustion engine works, but I don't think it's a government conspiracy to get me to work on time.
Yeah,
well,
do you know
clearly
what? Do people know what's in a fucking pizza when they order it?
Well, that's exactly right. I find it hard to stomach the argument that we should refuse to put something in our body unless we fully understand what it's from, what's in it from the people who celebrate the return of the McRib. right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, think about that the next time you cram Doritos in your mouth and wash it down with a vodka tonic. So anyway, and they were rigorously tested. No steps were skipped. In a stroke of genius, many of the steps necessary to create and test a vaccine were run concurrently rather than in sequence. And some of the funding for this process came from, you guessed it, Operation Warp Speed. So through gritted teeth, if you must, you can tell your anti-vax friends that Trump deserves some credit here, although with 539,000 caveats.
Yeah.
So we're getting a little long in the tooth here, but I thought it was important to cover all this ground. So let's just sum up. Vaccines do not cause autism in children. There is no such thing as vaccine overload. We know exactly what's in the COVID vaccines. They were absolutely tested and are very safe, and you should not be taking your medical advice from Charlie Sheen. So
Right. Take it from us.
Right, exactly. Take it from your doctor. So I hate to do this, but if there are any anti-vaxxers in your life, it might be a worthwhile effort to engage with them and try, if you can, to convince them or enlighten them or move them, because this thing is bad. It's real bad.
And we need everybody on board.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it's not just a matter of, well, they're only risking their own lives, because they're not.
There's no peeing section in a public pool.
Is it so dangerous to them that they're willing to go through another fucking year of this?
Right?
You know?
Or
Come
5
on.
years, because who knows? Like, if a variant pops up that's tricky or that's harder to make a vaccine for,
Yeah.
we're all fucked. So
Yeah,
thank God we've got a vaccine.
Yep.
Get it. Let's get the herd immunity so that we're okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need to do this together, and it's someone's going to have to talk to these people. I guess it's going to have to be us.
It's going to have to be us. If not us, if not now, when? If not who, us. That's how it is.
Right.
So. All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Uncle Doug. I know that was a lot of work.
Yeah.
All right.
Woo! Let's move on.
Well, friends, that is it for this week's barn burner of a show.
Hey, if you hate vaccinations, we'd love to hear from you because we want to yell at you. Send us an email at howto@howtoheretic.com.
Yeah, or if you're an anti-galactic Satanist of some kind, don't bother calling us about it at 903-88-HOW-TO, which is 903-884-6986. I'm also on Twitter at HowToHeretic.
And as always, thanks to our patrons, who we will get back with next week.
And thanks to our Dark Lord, Cody Layton, for editing the show.
And thanks to all of you friends for tuning in.
Bye, friends.